So welcome back to the channel. Bear with me. I'm just going to put this little cutting in here. Bear with me on this video. I did upload it and I wasn't going to post it because I think it's a bit boring, but I thought why not just put it up, get some ideas on comments. I am sort of slowly planning on taking this channel forward and getting going with it, and I'm just throwing a few things up just to sort of see which direction I want to put the channel in. So I thought I'd try it anyway. There is a really interesting one coming up next, so I'm sure yeah, I'm sure everyone will like the next one a lot more than this one, but let's get your views. Welcome back to the channel. I thought I'd start with something a little bit different, just to go through the first full week back at work, and I suppose the other 2 days that we did. So we opened back up on the Thursday and the Friday of the new year, the 2nd, and I decided before we finished, I decided to have a clear up in the workshop. We spent most of the last day, but we did have a couple of last minute jobs, and it didn't really get done properly. So I was in over the break, working on my own engine, and the floor's grubby. There was mess everywhere. The bins hadn't been emptied. There was a bit of a problem. We went weeks without having the bins emptied, and the skip out the back was also full. So it was a bit of a mess. So I decided, you know what, we're going to spend the first day tidying up, and we did till about 2 o'clock. Obviously, that brings its own problems in because you're not generating any revenue. But I just thought it's got to be done while we're quiet, or no, not while we're quiet, but before we start for the year. So yeah, it did go well. I'll include a few videos here. Unfortunately, I was going to try and do a quick tour in this intro, but all the cars are in the way, you can't see anything. But yeah, the limited bits that I filmed, we got done, and we got a couple of new cupboards set up and all the timing tools set out, and it does make a big difference. Just little things. I'll show you what I can. Things like finally sorting out the little diag cupboard, so we've got just a lot more space. Everything sort of laid out, which we've never had. These were all piled on top of each other. That's something that I've got out and not put away. And it just makes such a difference to your working life. I think this drawer's still a bit messy, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't really use. So this is the last drawer to be done, and just testers out. So it's just a lot easier to use. And we also decided to use a toolbox for things like bolts, washers. It just makes such a difference. Obviously, ideally we want to put the labels on here, what they are, but we're not there yet. But just having this sort of thing set out just really does make a difference. There's a few spare drawers as well, which is good. So we've got a bit more space. So there's just, yeah, little things like this just make massive differences. You can imagine when you're trying to find all these, they're all piled on top of each other. It's a nightmare. So I don't know where everything is yet, but we'll get there. We'll start learning where it all goes. Now, this was our parts desk. Now, it is a bit messy. I'm not going to pretend it's not, but it's just jobs in progress now. So we decided, this was at the front of the workshop, and we decided to move it to the back. We were a bit worried about it affecting this ramp for bigger stuff, but we just have to drive the bigger stuff on and we'll have space. But it's just, there are a few bits, like there's a gearbox up there I don't need, and there's a gearbox that's for a car, which is a bit of a project. There's a gearbox there that we don't actually need, but that's a very useful gearbox when it's rebuilt. So, and there's a couple of engines there. So one's a Transit, one's an Ivco. The Ivco bottom end is all good, and the Transit is not, but it needs a refresh. And they're things that I want to do. There's an Ingenium block there, and you can imagine we don't want to throw them away. So the idea, I think, is to put a container out the front. It does mean losing the parking space, which is frustrating, but I genuinely think it will be much better, because when I'm wanting to build up an engine or I'm wanting to do a gearbox repair, it takes so much space up in the workshop, and it just makes a mess. No matter what we do, it just makes a mess. I mean, look, there's one here for now, for example. I mean, this is waiting a warranty company, but it's just mess and it's just in the way. So although it will take up a parking space, which is invaluable, it does, I think, make a big difference. It means that we can get a gearbox out, it can be chucked in there, nothing coming around it, nice and clean in there. These other spare engines waiting to be built can be just put on the side, and we can just have a workbench, get the gearbox done, send the engines off for engineering work, and they can be put together in there so that when they come in, the cars can just come in, get the job done, and then there's no mess, because it does take up quite a lot of space, as you can see. But there's a mixture, so this is all jobs in progress. So there's like, you know, cylinder head for that engine there, waiting for the warranty company, all half the bits for the engine. So we do need the storage, and I'm not sure if jobs, these might stay in the container, they might stay in the workshop. If it's just this thing, bit of racking, it'll probably be fine. And things like there's a gearbox there and in the way. So, you know, it does take up some space. Press we moved, I need a bigger press, engine crane, so it just gives us some space for that. And we got another cupboard, so we're getting now, we've got written on there what's for what, so you can open the cupboard and it all makes a big difference. It just makes it a lot quicker, it helps you be more efficient, which means we've got a temporary little parts desk, which is nowhere near big enough. Obviously it's the end of the week, so there are a few bits to go on here, so this is nowhere near big enough at all, but we will probably put it either over here or over here where the fridge and everything is, because that can be gone upstairs when we finally get around to making it upstairs. But on the note of efficiency, I even had the idea that we're going to buy a little dishwasher, and that might sound absolutely mental. Why am I talking about a dishwasher? Why am I talking about it on this YouTube channel? But I thought we'd get into some of the business side. A couple of people did ask, and it's one of the things I will be pushing more than anything this year. So be warned, staff, if you're watching, is efficiencies. We've got tracking now for tracking how long jobs take and how long the technicians are on the job. Now, I don't want to be on the technician's back. It's not a case of trying to push them to rush, but we can just start to get an idea. If there's a certain job that we're doing all the time and the efficiency is really bad, then we need to charge more for it. That's as simple as that. We need to allocate more hours for it, otherwise it's not worth doing. So that's the sort of thing I want to do. And if we know there's jobs in that we can get done quicker, then it just helps to sort of balance what we're doing and where. And on the note of efficiency, you know, one of our staff was off this week, so I was covering in the reception, and I went to make a cup of tea, and I thought, oh, you know, I've got to wash up a load of mugs, because we've used the mugs, we've used the other mugs. Then I've got to wash them all up. Then the phone was ringing, so I forgot. So I just emptied the kettle out, reboil it, and things like that. And it was just like, do you know what? Even making a cup of coffee, it's inefficient. And if I can get a countertop dishwasher, which I've seen on Facebook Marketplace for 80 quid, which will be good enough for us, that £80, you're going to earn that back. Or not earn it back, but it's not going to, the efficiency is going to get that back in no time. So it hasn't really cost you. So we can have clean dishes in there and just quickly make a cup of tea, and get the coffee machine working, then just put the cup underneath it and push the button. And it sounds mad, but little things like that I want to do to help build the efficiency up in this business. So yeah, that's where we're going with it. But yeah, no, it was a good start to the year. It was busy. It was nice to come back to some work. I actually put, over the period while I was here, I actually put a couple of cars on the ramp so that we can come straight in and get on, and that was good. It was good to be able to just, yeah, crack on and do that. So yeah, that's sort of a little touch on business. So that's where our aim, or my aim this year, is to get the workshop running efficiently. Yeah, and try and minimise basically dead hours. So we've got a couple of vehicles, one vehicle on the ramp at the moment that is basically it's taken a lot of time up, and we're not getting paid for it. And that could have all been avoided. And that is, you know, it's our fault really. It could have been avoided with a bit more thought put into it. And so it's things like that I want to stop. The trouble with being so busy is you don't get a chance to look at every single job, not at all. You don't get a chance to keep an eye on everything. So there are certain things that we were doing on this car that we could have done while it was in progress, and this wouldn't have happened. But unfortunately, that's what's happened. I haven't been on top of it. And I feel like if I was, it wouldn't have happened, but it's basically cost me pretty much an entire day for a technician now, probably a day and a couple of hours. So it's a very expensive lesson. It's all costs a lot of money to work on a car for nothing. So, but that's my little section over. Let me know what you thought of that. And I'm going to take you through a training course now. So it was a training course that we did in-house for the lads. We touched on EGR valves in the last video and a 5-volt reference. Well, I'm going to take you through the training video. Some of it I had to recreate, but I'm going to take you through that, and then I'm sure I will find a job recorded on my phone somewhere that we can take you through next. So I was going to take you through a live training session, which I'm going to do, but the first bit of the video got completely messed up. I redid it at work, re-recorded it just on my own, and even that didn't quite come out. So I'm trying my best, so bear with me. Definitely never going to make a blockbuster film. Do not have the skills for that. But we had, just to set the scene, we had got a 2016 Ivco Daily in. And it wouldn't run properly. It came in, it had a camshaft sensor fault and a sensor 1 reference circuit fault, which is basically saying that the 5-volt system is down on sensor circuit number 1. So I'm going to explain what the 5-volt reference circuit is, and then we'll jump into the second part of the training video on the van. I'll come back later into the video, I'm pretty sure it is in the training session, as to why this vehicle had a camshaft sensor fault and why I wasn't suspecting straight away that it was a poor camshaft sensor, even though it was a relatively easy thing to rule out. So a crude diagram, but let's pretend that this is our camshaft sensor and this is our exhaust gas temperature sensor. And this is our EGR valve, or the EGR valve position sensor, we should say. So all these sensors will have a feed in, a ground, and it'll also have a signal wire. And this box at the top is our ECU. So they are all on separate wires on this van. There's only 2 wires for the exhaust temperature sensor. It doesn't need a ground. But yeah, they've all got a signal, a feed and a signal return wire back to the ECU, which is the important bit here. So on this diagram, you can see that we've got the variable geometry turbo sensor there. And then we've got what could be, it's only got 2 wires, so that could well be the exhaust gas temperature sensor. Then we've got a 3-wire sensor here. We're going to pretend that that's the camshaft sensor. So I'm just writing on there the turbo position sensor. And then we've got our wires going into them from the ECU. So 5 volts. We've got our ground. And we've got our signal or sensor. I think I called it a sensor return here, or yeah, return, but you know, signal wire or whatever. So there's a diagram of a basic ECU set. This is an Ivco. This is the right one for the car, but I'm not 100% sure which of these components all are. But that exhaust temperature sensor has only got 2, as you can see. And the camshaft sensor, we could have, that could be our 5-volt, that could be our ground, and that could be the signal wire or sensor return, to try and make it a bit more simple. So why do we need to have, or why is it a good idea to have 5 volts? So all the sensors on your engine generally will run off of a 5 volt reference, so they'll all run at 5 volts. Now this was because, quite simply, this technology was about before it was put in cars, and they just adopted it. But it does serve a good purpose in the fact that it is 5 volts. Bear that in mind, because your battery is at 12 volts. The ECU will generally have a 12 volt and run at 12 volts, but the signal wires on the sensors generally are 5 volts. You do get some odd 6 volt and 9 volt references. 9 volts seems to be a little bit more common on the later Fords, and as you watch the video you'll see there's a sliding scale, so the bigger the voltage technically, the more refined you could get these sensors, but generally 5 volt is perfect, and that's what we see on a daily basis. So as I was saying, they tend to run at 5 volts, so there's a little diode in the ECU that it brings down the voltage to the desired voltage. Now it needs a little bit more voltage than it puts out. So if it needs to maintain 5 volts, it will have to have a slightly higher voltage input, and there will be a barrier. So we're going to pretend, and it probably isn't this much, but let's pretend that it needs 6 volts worth of power to bring 5 volts out. So 6 volts to get 5 volts. Now the problem is your battery's 12 volts, but you've got things like starter motors and everything, which is going to bring the voltage down when you're trying to start the car. So 5 volt is a nice safe figure, because you're never going to get the battery down to below 6 volts, and if you would, there's going to be bigger problems. There's no way the car's going to start. But if you can keep a barrier when it's peak start mode, if you've got a real bad battery and it's gone down to 8 volts, the sensors are still going to pick up. The camshaft and the crankshaft sensors are still going to pick up, and they are definitely not going to get affected by a ripple. It's far away enough from 12 volts that doesn't really matter if it's going to go up down to 11.5 or up to 14.4 when the alternator's at full chat. It's still going to be able to maintain 5 volts for all those sensors. Now they tend to work on a range between about 4.8 volts and 0.2 volts. That's kind of generally the range of, you know, minimum and maximum for these sensors. So the sensors don't tend to go all the way up to 5 volts, and they don't tend to go right down to ground, but there are some exceptions, a little bit like that cam sensor, but generally you get a range because it keeps it, you know, at least it knows that it's not shorted to ground or shorted to 5 volts. So the Ivco in question that we're going to look at, and that's what these diagrams are based on, it came into us and it had a poor running issue. So the van would start and it would just bring the revs up on its own. It had no accelerator response. It flashed all sorts of warning lights on the dashboard. It had insufficient oil pressure coming up on the dash, and it just didn't want to know. It had a couple of fault codes in it for camshaft position, and it had a fault for the sensor reference. So it come up with sensor reference circuit 1. So which sensor would that be? Well, if I show you now on the diagram, you've got a few sensors here, and we're going to pretend, I think we're going to say that that's the 5 volt feed to the sensors. So that's your let's say that's the EGR position, and then an exhaust temperature sensor and an exhaust coolant temperature sensor. What you don't realise, and what the wiring diagrams don't tell you, which is really frustrating, is inside the ECU, even though they're all on separate wires, there's no wires going, you know, they're all gone back to the ECU for a perfect, nice, clean signal on each signal sensor, but the 5 volt references are quite often joined inside the ECU like that. And the problem is you don't know which ones are on the same circuit. So when you get one of them that's shorted to ground, it brings down all the sensors. But we'll come back later into the video, I'm pretty sure it is in the training session, as to why this vehicle had a camshaft sensor fault and why I wasn't suspecting straight away that it was a poor camshaft sensor, even though it was a relatively easy thing to rule out. A 2016 Ivco Daily. It has come in, it's got no throttle response whatsoever. It is coming up with the oil light on the dash, and it's saying that the oil level, the oil pressure is insignificant. It will not rev up, it's revving itself up, and it will not drive, it won't rev up, we all know. So, it had a few fault codes in it when it came in. It had two fault codes really. It had the sensors 1 supply circuit, and it also, you're going to have to ignore these 2 codes. Let's just pause it, we can see what it's running like. Let's just turn this off. So it had 2 codes. It had the 5 volt reference code. Sorry, it had this code, sensors 1 supply, an error in the electrical supply of sensors a sensor screw has been detected. That is saying there's a fault with the 5-volt reference. It doesn't tell us if it's high or low. These two you can ignore because they're unplugged. But it also had, interestingly, the camshaft sensor had a fault code. Any of you two know why it had a fault with the camshaft sensor? It was the first fault code that played up. It had a camshaft sensor code, and then when it came in, it had the sensors 1 supply. So before it set that sensor 1 supply, it set a camshaft sensor code. Anyone know why? We know, just for the purpose of the video, once we'd found that fault code, we've put a multimeter. So this is the 5-volt supply circuit. So this is the 5-volt supply, not the return. We're not going to go into how we know that, but we know that. And we've seen that the voltage is down. Why would it set a camshaft sensor fault code over anything else?
Yeah, to alter the... What's that, alter the timing?
No, we know we've got a 5-volt fault. So let me give you a clue. There's some other sensors on this circuit. The EGR valve is, the throttle valve is, the turbo is, but why was the camshaft sensor the one that set the fault code? I'll give you a clue, there's nothing wrong with the camshaft sensor, but why would that be the one that set the code?
Is it the most sensitive?
Yeah, exactly that. It's the most sensitive. So the EGR valve is going to be slower. The exhaust, I think some of the coolant temperature sensors are on this circuit. They're going to be slower. If the voltage just started to go down, it's going to affect this camshaft sensor first. Now the Ivco manual says it's got to be 4.75 to 5.25, and you can see we're quite low. So that is why that fault code has set. That fault code has come up and set that on the scan tool. So we can move it. I'm going to fast forward just for time's sake, and we know that this is the 5-volt reference for the camshaft sensor. We can go straight back to the ECU, and we can back probe that ECU, and we can confirm. Ignore that. When we start it up, that will go back down. It's only come up because it started to cool down a little bit. But just for the purposes of the video, see, right now, if we didn't know what we knew, we would suspect we had a wiring fault, because at the ECU we got 5 volts, so here we haven't. But I'm just telling you because I know when this warms up and starts playing up, that will shoot back down. So we're going to have to pretend, I think. It's only because it's cooled down a little bit. The actual fault with this van is gone for a minute. The van's running fine. But when this van starts playing up, that will go down. So we knew with back probing it that we had low voltage on both ends of the loom. Okay? So of course this isn't playing up now. In a minute when it plays up, we'll be able to carry on, I suppose. But what would be, do you think, your next stage in diagnosing this?
You know the wiring's okay, then you're surely going to check all of the sensors.
We don't know the wiring's okay.
No.
No, so we could suspect that. But we could also say, okay, so we've got a list of sensors. Let's pretend that it's all good and we know which sensors on this circuit. We don't, but let's pretend we do. What do you think your next thing to do would be? I might just give this a little rev to see if I can get it to play up. What would you do next? You've got low voltage.
I'd say,
What would you do to check the sensors?
not back probe the sensors.
Yeah, but if you've got bad 5-volt on this cam sensor signal, you're going to have it on every sensor. What could cause that voltage to come down?
Do you not try unplugging each sensor like without running to see what the difference it makes?
Why would you do when it? Why would you? Yeah, you're half right. You don't necessarily have to do it when it's running. In our case, this is now working fine, and I just want to say for the video purposes, it's got nothing to do with me moving that over. It was just coincidence that it stopped playing up. at that point. It's really annoying that it's not playing up, but there we go. But yeah, you're sort of right. So I would go round when it's playing up. Fortunately, this does get bad enough to play up. I just can't show it. Typical with the video, but let's pretend that this is still playing up, and let's pretend that voltage is.
4.5 wasn't 6 volts.
Yeah, it was going down to 3.6. It won't do it now. That is so frustrating. But I assure you, it's got nothing to do with back probing that connection. So just pause that video a sec. Right, so we can see that it's now playing up. It's going to the range, auto range is on, which is a bit annoying, but we can see it's pulling it nearly to ground. It's coming up, so we know we've got a problem. Okay. Now I know that this is bad enough that I can leave the ignition on. And you will see that in a minute when the fault, see it's still going down. See the multimeter is going down, so the problem's still here, yeah? Now what I chose to do on this ECU, this one's quite easy. So we know that this is the camshaft position sensor wire, and that is on the circuit because the wiring colour is the same, and the pin diagram shows us. Now what we can do with this, fortunately we're lucky here, I can disconnect that plug, and that ECU is still on. So what I can now do, I can go back to that camshaft sensor 5 volt reference, and you can see that we've still got 5 volts. And when we plug that back in, it drops back down because the fault is still there, yeah?
Yeah.
You with me?
Yep.
So what did you say earlier, Andy, about going through?
I would start unplugging each sensor to see when it affects the voltage, when the voltage drops down or alters, and when that does that, then you know you've potentially found a faulty sensor that's causing a problem.
Mm-hmm. Now there is another thing you can do. You can disconnect all those sensors.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll tell you one other thing you could do, which I'll just show you quickly. If you disconnect this kit, you have to do this disconnected, but you know you've got that wire is on this van. We know that this wire is separate, so the cam sensor is separate. You could run a test light. You could put 12 volts up this end, and then you could put a test light on here, and if it lit up, you know you've load tested the wire. So you know then, because this camshaft sensor is affected, you know you don't have a wiring fault. Then you could do, if you were still suspecting it, you could check this pin to ground with the resistance. Check that if there's any resistance. If there's no resistance to ground, then you know you've got a fault. But you're right. So we've gone round. We've done everything. We've started disconnecting all your faulty sensors. Sorry, not faulty sensors. You disconnected all the 5 volt sensors. Now on this one, it was a bit of a hit and miss because I didn't know which ones were on that circuit. It wasn't known to us then what ones are there and what ones aren't. What is up with this? Why is this not getting a reading? There we go. So we are, just to the video's sake, we are falsifying this a little bit, just because we don't want to have to wait for it to play up. But we went round and we disconnected all our sensors, and the last sensor we disconnected was this little thing on the turbo position sensor. And as soon as we disconnected, you can't see the plug, but we have got the new part here. As soon as we disconnected this, our voltage came up. So we know that this is the faulty part. We checked the wiring, we did check the plug is clean. This is actually what's wrong with this car. This is the turbo position plug, and a bit similar to how we had it before. This works in a very similar way. I don't think this plug will fit, and obviously the pins are probably wrong, but you've got your 5 volt, you've got your ground, and you've got your
reference voltage.
Yeah, the 5 volt is the reference voltage. You have the reference voltage return. So we know that this was the faulty part, and the reason it sometimes was playing up and not is because when you start the van, the turbo moves, and then there's obviously something wrong inside that sensor. But that 5-volt reference brought down the cam sensor, the throttle valve, the EGR, and the accelerator position pedal. So when this plays up, there's no accelerator pedal, is there? Because the accelerator pedal position sensor is also on this same, I found out since, is on this 5-volt. So it brings down, it didn't bring down that one wire, it brought down all those wires that are connected inside that ECU. There's 3 sensor supply circuits on this. There's 3 lots of 5-volt sensors. So this DPF sensor is on a separate sensor circuit, and I believe some of the temperature sensors are on circuit 2, but these are all on circuit 1. But they're all joined, so there'll be a little diode that's giving it that 5 volts in that ECU, and that is what this turbo thing was shorting out, and it got to the point, so when it was just going out of range, the first thing, like we said, is to play up was that camshaft sensor. The accelerator pedal sensors could have played up as well, because they're quite sensitive. It might have thrown a bit of a wobbler with them, but we'll get into that another day. But that was the first sort of clue, and then after a while it set that code, which is sensors 1, because it knew that that 5-volt is down. And where we've been playing with this, you see now when we read the fault codes, that how many times it's occurred will have gone up significantly, 33 times. And then there's the codes, because obviously we've opened that throttle valve, we've opened that boost temperature sensor, etc, etc, and the turbo control we've disconnected. But you see that one there, that camshaft sensor has faulted 12 times. So the fuel pressure sensor is also faulted, the DRV, so these ones are starting to fault, but that camshaft sensor is that camshaft sensor signal you can see is the most sensitive. So when we change this throttle valve next week, this van will be fixed and the customer can have it back, and all these problems will go away. So a little bit of a different video on that one. I'm assuming it's not going to be to everyone's cup of tea, but let me know what you thought in the comments. The next garage video, there will be some repairs to take through. We've got a Jaguar I-Pace which didn't start, and I know we filmed that one. Got some timing chains on the Astra or the Vauxhall 1.6 engine, so yeah, there's plenty of different content to come. And I think the next video up will be back onto the Lamborghini challenge, and we'll take you through the next vehicle we bought. And I forgot to put the figures in that focus video, but we'll add them. But yeah, let me know what you thought, whether that's something you wanted to include. Probably been a bit boring for some, but I'd be interested in knowing your views.